I have with me today, of course, a fellow retired cop, but he is so much more than that. He has really had a lifetime of service. And instead of enjoying his retirement somewhere on a beach, he is going to jump into the American political system. So I just knew that you had to meet him. Ron Vitiello, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me on. Really a pleasure.
So you have had, first of all, let's talk about your law enforcement career. You have had quite a law enforcement career. Tell folks about that.
Yeah, I started in the Border Patrol in 1985. I kid with the younger people now. I got in the Border Patrol before it was cool. Um, Started my career in Laredo, Texas. Laredo is a place where it's unique in the Border Patrol in that it has all of the things, all of the activities that patrol agents do is represented there. So train check, river watch, what we call sign cutting, highway checkpoints, horse patrol, bike patrol, has all of those things. It's a great place to learn how to do the job. I was there a couple of different times, but about 9 years on the line in that space. And just like a wonderful career. Got promoted to supervision there, went into staff work in the late 90s, worked in Arizona, in Nogales on the border there for a couple of years right before 9/11. My first staff assignment at headquarters was right after 9/11 in 2002. Did that for a couple of years, had a field command in Swanton, Vermont on the Canadian border, just north of Burlington for those that are watching. And after that assignment, got to be a senior executive, of another promotion to chief of the Rio Grande Valley in McAllen, Texas. Edinburgh is where the sector headquarters is. That happens to be my wife's hometown. So the two kids we raised moved all over those places with us. And that was the first time we had family close by. It was right during the first Secure Fence Act. We got there in 2007. So it was the first major border wall construction that we had seen in decades. So very challenging assignment, but great because we had family there and, had wonderful people to work with. Back to headquarters in 2010 to be the deputy chief at headquarters. Did that for a number of years, finally became the chief in 2017. And then said yes when President Trump asked me to be the ICE director. I acted in that job for a while seeking the nomination. Very different kind of thing. I was a career person until that moment, and got on a committee, but didn't stay long enough to go onto the full floor. And that was my career. Like I said, I worked with really wonderful people. I did want to do something very different. I knew I was going to retire out of the headquarters. I wanted to do something very different before I left. And so being the director or the acting director at ICE, again, a great group of people, an honor to lead them in very, interesting times. President Trump was a serious advocate for border security and having an immigration system that has integrity. So being in those roles at that time, very different than the beginning of my career. I would also say that 9/11 changed the Border Patrol and the Homeland Security enterprise in a number of ways. Obviously, the law that created DHS was in 2003, but we as an institution in the Border Patrol changed completely how we plan, how we did logistics, how we run operations. And, it was a real defining time for my career as well as the institution itself. And then when we were in the Trump administration, again, very, very different than anything we had seen before. And having somebody in the White House that has your back really makes a big difference. And then in that time frame when I was at headquarters, a lot of interaction with Congress, including seeking the nomination. So why I want to do the politics is because I don't think there's enough people up there that are servants, right? When you take an oath as an officer, when you're serving the community, when you're out there on the streets in the front line, protecting and helping people, that's a calling that it changes your whole outlook on life in a number of ways, right? But it's about service. That oath is to the Constitution, which means it's to the people. And I don't think we have enough people in Washington that feel that way. I think there are too many of them that are lining their pockets. I think there are too many of them that are into the performance on the internet or on television and not doing what they need to do to protect us, to keep us safe. I mean, look at what's happening on the border. It's amazing what we allow to happen. and what these Democrats, including the president, they've just destroyed all the control levels that we have there, and it's really bad. So I'm in the race to try to correct that and to serve the people of Virginia if they'll trust me with their vote. And it's all going to be about that. I could care less about being the junior senator from or the trappings of the office. I want to go in there and get behind the curtain, get my hands dirty in things like energy policy, things like our federal debt and how we budget in this country at the macro level in government. And obviously, no training needed for fixing the border problem.
Well, and here's the thing. You bring up such a great point because, every law enforcement officer in this country, the first thing that we do when we get hired is we raise our right hand and we swear that oath to the Constitution. That's what our elected officials do as well. But, you make such a great point because people in law enforcement, we already have that servant mentality, that public servant mentality, and we're certainly not there for the money. We're not there for the glory and all of that. We're not there for the status. And in fact, when you talk about the Border Patrol, when you talk about Homeland Security in general, I want to talk about that a little bit. You started in the mid 80s when we had pretty good control of our southern borders. In the same time that you started, I was working narcotics in the Chicagoland area, and we would arrest someone, usually if they were from Mexico. We'd arrest them, immediately have them deported, and we'd see them back the next week. So part of what we're seeing now is a long-term problem, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Back when I started and through a lot of my career, probably until very recently, until like the, 2012, 2015 timeframe, this was mostly an immigration problem. The illegal migration problem was mostly a Mexico problem. For most of the time I was in Laredo, 90% of everybody that we encountered were people who had crossed illegally from Mexico. And so, the jails and the crimes that they committed, it was mostly a problem with migration, illegal migration from Mexico. The drugs are all coming from Mexico. And so, yeah, it's a very different problem as we see it today. 9/11 changed the expectation of the American people about what the border should look like and who comes and goes into the country. And so we are better, suited as it relates to equipment and technology. The policies, let's set that aside for a minute, but they're much better equipped now on the border. But the threats are also much higher, right? This fentanyl didn't exist when I was a frontline agent. I can't imagine living and working in an environment where if you touch something, it could kill you. We didn't face those kinds of challenges, and that's what the frontline sees every day. And then we have a proxy war in the Middle East. We have a proxy war in Europe, and we know that China hates us. Right? They're not competitors. They're adversaries. We're in a cold war with China, whether we want to admit it or not. And they're watching what's going on at the border. And so those threats that we see overseas have much more access to our country and our neighborhoods and our towns and cities than they've ever had before. And so we all need to be concerned. I don't want people to freak out because we do have good frontline law enforcement people in all of our communities. But we also need to be aware that there's a gaping hole at the southern border. And the secretary himself 3 weeks ago said that everyone that CBP is encountering, 85% of them are being released into the United States. We've never seen anything like the kinds of traffic that we see now in the volume and velocity that we see it. We've never been in a place where we were releasing 85% of the people that came either. So we're at great risk. The choices and the policies that are been acted by this administration have put us in this really dangerous place, and I hope it gets fixed soon.
When you talk about 9/11/01, I think that as a nation, very often people have forgotten that attack was committed by 19 people in this country illegally, 19 people who took advantage of our immigration system. Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, we changed everything after 9/11 because we realized that those people were here. We invited them mostly, right? They overstayed their visas and they came, I think we had one of them illegally migrated from Canada, but we invited them here. We gave them at their request, pilot training. They learned how to fly with visas that were issued by the U.S. State Department. And so, yeah, we had to change everything. We were at severe danger then. We just didn't know it. We didn't have the imagination that people would use airplanes like they did on 9/11. And we had a very lax immigration system, and we're sort of back. We're in a situation where thousands, up to 10,000 people a day, 24 hours, are being encountered by the Border Patrol, and that's just encounters. That not all crime that happens, people don't get arrested, and that's what's happening at the border too, right? They call it gotaways. It's kind of a term of art, but there are lots of people crossing the border that are never seen by law enforcement, and so the dangers and the risks are higher than they've been it's never been as bad as it is right now.
Prior to the 2020 extreme vilification of law enforcement, you, as the acting ICE director, were dealing with this unbelievable vilification of ICE which culminated in the American public seeing ICE agents, the office destroyed in Portland, agents being literally trapped in a burning, federal building, things like that. Talk about that. What was that like, and how did that happen?
Very surreal. We had real concerns for the security of our men and women that were out there, and not just the frontline badge carriers, right? The guys that are law enforcement officers, but our attorneys, our administrative staff. They were stuck inside the courthouse there for quite some time. They couldn't go back to work because that block had been taken over by the crazies. Imagine people who go to work every day to serve you and me, being barricaded inside of the building that they work at just because they work for an agency that's authorized by the U.S. Congress, that's authorized by U.S. law. And because people wanted to abolish ICE, we had all these politicians and these activist groups that attacked us. And in Portland, people took it. I mean, it was serious. It was physical attack on top of the rhetoric. And then, for me, personally, right, I wasn't as much at risk. But imagine going into the halls of the House or the Senate and briefing members, right, people who swore an oath and are serving their constituency, who ran on the platform of abolishing the agency. And those of us in law enforcement knew that when they started saying things like abolish ICE, they weren't going to stop there. We saw what happened in the riots in 2020. They wanted all police gone. We've had these cities that, the defund movement. It's not going to stop there, right? They're attacking our campuses, literally, like the ideology at our schools at every level. We're being attacked. It started with abolish ICE, or it became, in the media with abolish ICE, but it didn't stop there. And there's another podcaster that I listen to, Adam Carolla. He calls it the progressive movement, right? They're progressing and they are moving every single day, and it gets worse and worse. Unfortunately, and they're selling this indoctrination to our children. It's a real danger for us.
So you saw how the system was working and frankly not working. And so when you retired, again, instead of, laying down on a beach and hanging out with your family and things like that, you decided to jump into an even dirtier business. And that's politics. What were you thinking when you sat down and said, gee, I think I'm going to run for the Senate?
Yeah, well, I was looking around and watching all the things that were happening. I was a lot of interaction with the House and the Senate while I was in. I testified on our behalf, on behalf of the government 21 times, worked on specific legislation to get passed in this House and the Senate. So I understand the mechanics of how that is supposed to work and who the people and how they represent us in that space. And then when I went through the nomination process, it's a little bit more intimate for me, right? Because I was asking senators to vote for me to get confirmed in that position. And so what I realized is that integrity matters. I was tested for, hey, if you change or you do this thing for me, then maybe I'll vote for you. That was a real thing that happened to me. And so what I realized is that we don't have good people who have servants' hearts, not all of them. In that space. And so we need to have more of them. So I'm raising my hand. I think I have the skills to add value in that mix. And so the Senate seat in Virginia is up in 2024. The primary is in June. So I'm running for the Republican nomination because I can't watch it anymore. I got to get my hands in there and try to make things better with the idea, like we talked about, as a servant, not to be the senator, but to help the people of the Commonwealth of Virginia.
You know, one of the things that you bring to the table is because we talk a lot about the southern border, but you worked on the northern border, and I think people kind of forget about that. Talk about the northern border for a minute and what people need to be aware of and concerned about.
So all of the challenges you see on the southern border, people coming in illegally, the illegal drug trade, organized crime, all of those things exist on our Canadian border as well. There's a difference in volume, obviously. People, not lots, our economic balance with that part of the world is more similar. So you don't have the economic migration that you see on the southern border, but you have everything else. You have people who would not otherwise be allowed in through the front door, trying to sneak in between the ports of entry. And so all of those challenges are the same. The volume is different. We have fewer resources there, a lot more territory to cover on the northern border, and not a lot of technology to help. And so we rely very deeply on the people who live there, and our law enforcement relationships, right? State, local, federal, and in Canada, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, their federal agency, kind of like the FBI/police force, the local constabulary workforce, very good communications and active work with our government counterparts in Canada. And obviously the people that live there are also a valuable resource for our officers because they can't be, there's not enough of us to cover it like we can cover some places on the southern border. And so having that citizen involvement and having a great relationship with law enforcement on the other side of the line really kind of helps balance it out. We can trust our partners in Canada much more so than we can in certain parts of Mexico. So it's the dangers are there, the threats are there. 90% of the Canadian population lives within 100 miles of the border, right? So most of Canada is they're literally our neighbors. And then there's lots of cultural support for the terrible organized crime problem with all the gangs you've ever heard of, including mafia and motorcycle gangs, et cetera. And so those threats are really close to where we live, close to our border. And then there's lots of cultural support also for the threats that were resident at 9/11, right? People from the Middle East, there's a lot of cultural support. They have a more generous immigration system. So those threats that we see overseas and in some of our own communities, frankly, are also in Canada. So, it's great that we have a good relationship with the government there because there are active threats that we need to be concerned about.
Do you think that Americans will have the stomach for mass deportation if the administration changes and we get back control of the border?
Well, this is a very good point. We never have before. When we talked about the Abolish ICE movement, that is drawn from when our men and women did planned enforcement operations for specific targets in specific neighborhoods and homes. It usually causes an outrage. All the big cities, all the blue cities, will hate it. Some of the weaker conservatives or Republicans or people in red states are not going to like it a lot either because it's very difficult to do. It's hard to find these people all the way around. It doesn't, there's a lot of them. So it's a target-rich environment, but they're not easy to find. Think about the footprint that we all have, right? We have a job with a paycheck and a social security card and a driver's license. Most of these people, especially the recently arrived, don't have any of that. And so if they have a cell phone, it might not be in their name. If they're renting an apartment or paying a gas bill, it might not be in their name either. So they're hard to find. And then when you do find them, their life they have a life just like you and I do. They may have kids in school. They may be caring for an elderly relative. They may have a relative that's serving in the armed forces. And so when a law enforcement officer knocks on that door to get a specific target, all of those other things are going to be part and parcel of what they have to deal with in real time. And they're super professional people. They're very compassionate in those kinds of situations. But we are going to see, when this operation starts, we're going to see the headlines: the crying little kids and the elderly mother of the family who's left alone on her porch because her son or her daughter or whatever are in the country illegally. And we're enforcing the law. And so people need to realize that, and they need to, remember what's happening now, because the way you prevent what's happening now is you don't let it happen again, and you hold to account the people who took advantage, including those that are here illegally.
Yeah, that is so well said. It's not going to be pretty, but I think because of the opening of the floodgates, on both of our borders, we're going to have to do something. You can't have a sovereign nation with open borders. Chief, I wish we had about another 3 hours to talk. But where can people follow you on social media? Where can they find out more about you and your campaign and what you really want for this country?
I'm at Chief Vitiello on Twitter. And then my website is chiefvitiello4senate.org. That's Chief Vitiello, FOR Senate.org. And people can find out all about the campaign, where we're going to be next, all the kinds of things that are part and parcel of my new role in trying to win this race.
Chief, thanks for all your insight and for your decades of service to the country. We appreciate you being with us. And if you would like more information about the National Police Association, visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Ma'am, put the gun down! Put the gun down!
Last year, law enforcement officers were involved in hundreds of thousands of use of force incidents. A use of force incident is when an officer must use nonverbal tactics to gain control of a dangerous situation.
Put the knife on the ground.
In many cases, officers have no choice but to use force when a suspect doesn't comply with a lawful order.
Use of force is always ugly. No one likes it, especially police officers.
Together, we can help de-escalate these dangerous encounters. Help police officers by complying with their lawful orders. Don't attack, attempt to disarm, or flee from an officer.
Use of force is an officer's last option. Most incidents can be avoided by not resisting arrest.
If you feel you've been wrongfully detained by a police officer, then seek a legal solution after the encounter has been resolved.
Let's keep everyone safe. Comply now and complain later.